Welcome to a new episode of Cheaters Always Cheat. Like, subscribe, and share to stay connected.
It's hard to believe I'm the one writing this, but here I am, speaking in general terms and using fake names to maintain confidentiality. Let's call my husband Deegan and me Jenny. We're both in our 20s and have been married for over 2 years. We met unexpectedly in public, started chatting, exchanged contact information, and the rest is history. It felt like love at first sight, at least for me. We dated for 6 months and then lived together for a year before getting married. Due to my parents' insistence, we had a large wedding. They covered all the expenses except for the bar tab and our honeymoon, which Deegan's parents paid for. My parents adore Deegan, and his parents have a deep affection for me. Our marriage has been fantastic, and I wouldn't change a thing. Deegan treats me exceptionally well, and I do the same for him. It's just our natural way of expressing love and care for each other, which has always been the foundation of our relationship. Now, you might wonder what's the issue here. Well, the problem is that I cheated on Deegan with a colleague from work 2 months ago, and now I'm burdened with guilt. Whenever Deegan does something kind for me, I feel terrible inside. I'm overwhelmed with guilt and a sense of not deserving his kindness. In an attempt to make amends for my betrayal, I've been exceptionally attentive to him since we returned from our trip. While we've always been naturally affectionate with each other, I'm taking it to another level. My dad even playfully teases us, suggesting we get a room because we're constantly engaged in some form of public display of affection. Despite all this, the weight of my actions still hangs heavily over me, and I can't shake off the remorse. As mentioned earlier, I won't delve into details, but I want to clarify how things unfolded with my coworker. I was chosen to join a special work team at my company. This project was a significant venture for the company and held great importance for our shareholders. Working on this assignment was satisfying but incredibly demanding and stressful, to the extent that one of our team members, a woman, experienced a nervous breakdown. Most of our work on the project was done remotely, but we did have 3 in-person team meetings along the way. As we neared the project's completion, something went wrong with the part one was responsible for. This required me to spend a week at one of our regional offices to fix the issue. Initially, 3 of us were scheduled to go, but at the last minute, the woman I mentioned who had the nervous breakdown had to cancel for obvious reasons. This left me and another coworker, whom I'll call Percy, to tackle the problem and ensure the project met its deadline. We were on a tight schedule and worked continuously from 7 a.m. to well past 10 p.m. for the first 2 nights, spending every available moment together. We worked together in the office and ordered food for both lunch and dinner. The intensity of the work and the pressure to succeed created a bond between us that I hadn't anticipated. I was extremely stressed and felt like I was about to have a nervous breakdown as well. Thankfully, by 4 p.m. on Wednesday, we managed to solve the problem. To celebrate, we went to a nice restaurant and had a bit too much to drink. After returning to the hotel, one thing led to another, and I cheated on my husband. It was a spontaneous, thoughtless action. At first, I didn't have any negative feelings about it because I somehow justified it due to our hard work. So, the next night, Percy and I repeated what we did the night before. However, after being together on Thursday, the harsh reality of our actions hit me. The guilt and regret I feel now are overwhelming, and I'm struggling to come to terms with what I did. We immediately regretted our actions. Percy knew I was in a happy marriage, and I was aware that he was engaged. We decided right then and there to pretend it never happened. We also feared that if news of our affair leaked within our company, it could severely harm our reputations and put our jobs at risk, especially since it happened during a company-sponsored business trip. That night, we parted ways and agreed to avoid communication unless absolutely necessary. This wouldn't be too difficult since the project we worked on was unique, and we lived on opposite sides of the country, making it unlikely we would see each other again. We thought we ended things that night, but it left a lingering unease in my mind. On the flight home, I initially felt fine but then started to feel anxious about seeing Deegan at the airport. I managed to stay composed until I reached the pickup area and saw him waiting with a broad, welcoming smile. As soon as I saw him, I broke into tears, and we embraced and kissed each other repeatedly, holding on tightly. We were in that embrace for so long that an airport police officer approached us, tapping on the window and signaling us to move from the pickup lane. Deegan asked me what was wrong, and I explained that I had been under a lot of stress and missed him so much that I couldn't help but break down when I saw him. He understood, and that night we shared a beautiful and passionate evening together, which seemed to momentarily erase my guilt. Since returning from the trip, I've been giving him extra attention. He's enjoying the care and deserves it, but inside, I'm suffering tremendously. Guilt is consuming my mind, and it's getting worse each day. I'm struggling with sleep and appetite, and it's starting to affect my work. All I want is to be close to my husband and show him how much I love him, but the weight of my actions keeps haunting me. I even have recurring nightmares about him discovering the affair and leaving me. Last week, we decided to try to have a child, which has intensified my emotions even more. I keep thinking that I don't deserve him or that he deserves someone better than me. I don't believe I can continue living with this guilt for much longer. No one knows about the affair except Percy and me. My situation is even tougher because I have no one to confide in. My conscience is urging me to be honest and tell Deegan about my actions, but I'm terrified that it will ruin our relationship. I understand that if I confess, it will devastate him, and he might never see me the same way again. However, I believe he might eventually forgive me because of his deep love for me and his naturally kind and caring nature. So, here's my dilemma: should I confess my meaningless affair from 2 months ago to my husband, or stay silent and make amends in other ways? I'd appreciate hearing from those who have faced a similar situation and how you handled it. Please be honest and share both the positive and negative outcomes of your experiences. First update, 32 days after my initial post. I want to thank all of you for your heartfelt responses. I've carefully read each one and truly appreciate your willingness to share your personal experiences. After much thought and 3 sessions with an excellent therapist, I've decided to tell my husband. It's going to be incredibly hard for me, and it will undoubtedly hurt him deeply, but it's something I need to do to move forward. To prepare for this, I've created a detailed timeline of the affair, which wasn't difficult since it was purely physical and lasted less than 24 hours with no emotional involvement. My therapist has also given me helpful articles on how to support a spouse dealing with infidelity, specifically what actions to avoid. I'm mentally prepared for the possibility that he might need some time apart from me. From what I've learned, this reaction is entirely normal, although I will be sad if he chooses to react that way. As I mentioned earlier, my husband is affectionate and caring. He's generous and protective, so I don't expect him to respond in a harsh manner to this news. Instead, I believe he will be hurt and disappointed by my actions. I'm mentally prepared for a range of responses, but I hope for the best. Please keep your fingers crossed for me. 13 months after my previous update. Hello everyone, it's been quite some time since I last posted here. Many of you have reached out to ask about the progress of my situation. I want to thank you for your interest and concern. I intended to provide an update earlier, but life got pretty hectic and I simply didn't have the time or energy to sit down and write. Things have finally started to settle down for me recently, so here I am. I'll continue where I left off. If you remember, I was about to confess to my husband about the brief affair I had with a coworker. My plan was to have that conversation on a Saturday morning, and I followed through with it. I made sure we'd both be home that morning because we had plans for the afternoon, and I wanted to talk without interruptions. On the morning of the confession, I was extremely nervous and almost backed out of it. Looking back now, I wish I had. I made Deegan's favorite breakfast, and after we ate, I told him about the affair. He listened carefully as I spoke without saying a word. When I finished, he looked at me as if he could see right through me, his eyes filled with pain and disbelief. Then he excused himself and went to the office, closing the door behind him. I went to the door and tried to turn the handle, but it was locked. I spoke to him through the door, repeating how sorry I was and expressing my love for him. I told him that I'd be waiting in the living room whenever he was ready to talk. According to the advice in various articles, those who have strayed should provide their betrayed partner with ample space. Therefore, that's exactly what I did. After a few minutes, I thought I heard him talking to someone, so I quietly approached the door to listen in, but sadly, I couldn't discern the conversation. I then went back to the living room. Shortly afterward, I received a call from my mom, which I let go to voicemail because I didn't feel ready to talk. About 10 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. When I looked out, I saw my parents standing there. I opened the door and was about to ask them to come back later as Deegan and I were in the midst of a private discussion. However, my mom mentioned that Deegan had called them and revealed everything. I was utterly shocked and left speechless. My dad asked if it was true, and I responded, "True about what?" He then asked, "Did you have an affair with one of your coworkers?" I confessed and began crying. My mom questioned how I could do such a thing, but before I could respond, Deegan emerged from the office and began talking with my parents, completely ignoring me and referring to me in the third person. He asked my dad to take me away since he wasn't in a good state of mind. I kept trying to talk to him, but he continued to ignore me, focusing only on my parents as if I were invisible. Desperate for his attention, I approached him and hugged him. Although he didn't push me away, he didn't hug me back either. After I released him, he went back to the office and locked the door. My parents began questioning me about the affair, which upset me, and I ran into the bedroom. My mom followed, and we talked for a while before she helped me pack a few things. Before leaving, I spoke to Deegan through the door, telling him I loved him and that I would stay away until he was ready to talk. I informed him that I was going to my parents' house and would remain there as long as he needed. I didn't hear from him for the rest of the day. I tried to contact him several times, but he didn't respond. In my final text, I mentioned that I was coming over because I was worried about him. He replied and asked me to give him some space. I spent the entire day crying and repeatedly asking myself how something like this could happen. When I woke up on Sunday morning, my parents were sitting at the table, drinking coffee with sad expressions on their faces. I thought they were upset about my actions, but there was more to it. My dad informed me that Deegan had come over earlier that morning. I was excited and asked if they had spoken to him. My dad replied, "No, we didn't see him." I then asked how they knew he had been there. My dad explained that it was because he had left my car in the driveway, filled with all my belongings. Upon hearing this, I simply said, "What?" and rushed out to the driveway, where I saw my SUV parked and packed to the brim with trash bags. Seeing that, I broke down and collapsed to the ground, crying. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. I told my parents that I needed to go to my house to speak with Deegan. When I arrived, he was home but didn't answer the door. I tried unlocking the doors with my keys, but the internal deadbolts were engaged, preventing entry. My next idea was to use the garage, but when I checked my visor, I realized Deegan had taken the remote. I thought I could use the garage keypad, but he had changed the code, effectively locking me out of my own home. Given the early hour on a Sunday morning, I didn't want to disturb the neighbors, so I began texting him. Initially, I was polite, but when he didn't respond, I sent a message stating it was my house too, and he couldn't just lock me out. His response was a blunt, "Sue me." I was in disbelief that the man I had once loved deeply and who had been so kind and caring was treating me this way. I knew I deserved consequences but not such harsh treatment. At the very least, I expected him to be civil and not act irrationally. Eventually, I returned to my parents' house, locked myself in my old room, and spent most of the day in tears, utterly bewildered by the events of the past 24 hours. Throughout the day, I kept trying to contact Deegan, but he remained unresponsive. On Monday morning, I called my boss and requested 3 days off to deal with the situation. I went back to the house on Monday morning and managed to get inside. Deegan was not there, and when I entered our bedroom, I saw that all his clothes were gone. It was when I walked into the office that I saw something that completely shattered me. I found our wedding album cover next to the shredder, and Deegan had removed all the pictures and shredded them. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. As I moved through the house, I noticed all the pictures of us were missing. After further searching, I found the empty frames, and it became clear he had shredded those too. I felt deeply saddened and couldn't comprehend what was happening. I decided to call Deegan's workplace and spoke with the receptionist. I asked if I could speak with him, and she informed me that he wouldn't be in the office for the rest of the week as he had taken time off. I then reached out to my mother-in-law. She answered the call and mentioned that Deegan had already told her and my father-in-law about everything. I asked if she knew where he was, and she confirmed she did but refused to tell me and abruptly ended the conversation. I felt hurt by this situation because I had a close relationship with my in-laws. On Wednesday of that week, I began receiving calls from Percy. I chose to ignore all his calls and sent them to voicemail. Later, when I listened to his messages, he was urgently asking me to call him as soon as possible. Finally, in his last message, he mentioned that Deegan had somehow contacted his fiancée and told her everything about us. Upon hearing this, I called Percy, and he was furious. He reminded me that we had promised not to disclose anything to anyone. I acknowledged this and admitted that I should have informed him before speaking to my husband, but I hadn't anticipated Deegan's reaction. Percy then revealed he had told his fiancée that my husband was lying and that nothing had happened. He said she planned to call me, and he insisted I tell her the same story. I told him I couldn't do that, and he began pleading with me. Once I reiterated my refusal to lie, he started verbally attacking me, using hurtful words and insults. He wouldn't stop, so I ended the call by hanging up on him and blocking his number. Shortly after, I received a call from his fiancée, and I told her everything. She remained silent as I recounted the events, and when I finished, she abruptly hung up. However, the ordeal didn't end there. When I returned to work the next day, I was summoned to the office of the HR director, who happened to be a friend of mine. Initially, I didn't suspect anything was wrong, but upon arriving, I noticed the HR manager and the director of security were also present. I had a bad feeling. They asked me to sit down and mentioned they had some questions for me. They told me they had been contacted by someone alleging that Percy and I had engaged in an affair during company time and had used company resources. My heart sank, and I began to cry. I confessed what had happened but clarified that nothing had occurred during official work hours. The HR director explained that when salaried employees travel for business, the entire trip is considered work time. She clarified that the hotel room is regarded as a company resource since it was paid for by the company. They asked about the second night when Percy and I were together. They asked if I had dinner with Percy that evening, and I reluctantly admitted that I had. They followed up by asking if I had consumed wine, to which I replied yes, admitting that I had 2 glasses. Next, they asked if I had purchased the wine, and I replied that I had not. Percy had made the purchase. The HR director pointed out that this was against company policy because employees are not allowed to use another employee's card for buying food or drinks. As a result, I received a final written warning for these infractions, while Percy faced termination. To clarify, there was no bias in favor of my gender. Percy would have faced the same outcome if these were the only issues, but unfortunately for him, there were additional complications. Percy was terminated because he extended his stay by an extra day without a valid business reason and charged all the expenses, including the flight change fee, hotel stay, and all his meals, which included 2 bottles of wine. He extended his stay solely to be with me the following evening. I feel deeply remorseful about what happened to Percy. He was an outstanding employee with a promising future, but now he's unemployed, and his fiancée left him, all because of my actions. As for me, any aspirations of getting a promotion in the aftermath of this incident seem unlikely. To add to the turmoil, the following Monday at work, Deegan had divorce papers served to me at the reception desk. The receptionist called to inform me that there was a delivery up front. As I arrived there, a man was waiting with a box of flowers. I hoped they were a gift from Deegan, and indeed they were. However, after I signed for the package, the man handed me the flowers and then delivered the divorce papers, stating, "Mrs. Jenny, you have officially been served with divorce papers." My world fell apart at that moment, and I couldn't hold back my tears. I had to leave the office and decided to take the rest of the week off. Over the next 7 months, I made every effort to salvage my marriage, but Deegan refused to engage with me at all. In fact, he hasn't uttered a single word to me since I confessed. Our divorce has now been finalized, but I'm still struggling emotionally. I cherish and miss the kind man he used to be before my affair, but I understand that person no longer exists. I acknowledge that I deserve to face consequences for my actions, but I never anticipated Deegan's reaction. I knew there was a slim chance that my confession could end our relationship, but I believed that likelihood was exceedingly rare. I want to conclude with a message for my husband. Babe, if you ever come across this, I want you to know that I am genuinely sorry and will love you eternally. End of story. At Unforgiving 0007 wrote, blah blah, why do cheaters confess their love to OP at its most unwanted phase? You got what you deserve. At Wild Will Desfam wrote, your love stank. LOL. Let's move to the second story. I am 36 years old, and my wife is 38. We first met when I was in my 3rd year of college, and she was in her 4th. Since that day, we've been together. After dating for 3 years, we decided to move in together. Then, after 3 more years, we got married. 2 years after that, our happiness grew when my wife became pregnant, and we welcomed our daughter into the world. Like any typical family, we had our fair share of domestic disagreements, but we always managed to reconcile swiftly, sometimes even in the middle of an argument. In general, we were a traditional family. Once I completed my education, I embarked on my career journey, working hard to climb the corporate ladder. Eventually, I earned enough to afford a spacious 4-room apartment. We invested significantly in renovating it and happily settled into our new home. My wife, after her maternity leave, resumed her career, which went quite smoothly. She secured a good position and started earning a decent income. With our combined earnings, we achieved financial prosperity over time. We acquired everything we needed, including a new apartment for our growing daughter, luxurious cars, and all the comforts one could desire. Life felt abundant. I held deep love for my wife and remained faithful to her throughout our marriage. I wasn't a heavy drinker, but occasionally I'd enjoy a glass of wine with dinner. I recently gave up smoking. We always planned our vacations together, and I developed a passion for diving and skiing. While my wife chose not to dive due to fear, she took up skiing. Our lives revolved around working, earning money, and savoring the rewards of our hard work. My wife's job was related to international business, often involving meetings with colleagues from abroad for negotiations. Gradually, I began to notice that her interactions with these colleagues seemed to be longer than before. While it initially piqued my curiosity, I didn't pay much attention to it at first. Another notable change was her receiving Snapchat messages in the evenings. Oddly, when her foreign colleagues were around, these messages stopped coming. A couple of times, I checked her phone after she had fallen asleep, but all the messages had been deleted. I observed that the last message consistently arrived around 7 p.m., even though her phone received notifications after she had already gone to bed. In the end, suspicion completely consumed me. One evening, she arrived home late, around 10 p.m., and I, perhaps foolishly, jokingly inquired if she had bid farewell to her secret admirer. I witnessed a fear in her eyes like never before. However, once she realized I was teasing, she smiled and dismissed it, calling me a fool. Furthermore, she occasionally traveled abroad to visit her colleagues in return. When my suspicions peaked, I reached a breaking point. I resorted to installing spyware on her phone, enabling remote control through SMS or my personal account. This software could capture audio from her surroundings, take pictures with the camera, and send all the data to my personal account. One day, she embarked on another business trip, and in the evening, after spending time with our daughter, assisting her with homework, and putting her to bed by 10 p.m., I accessed the spyware account and instructed it to record her phone's surroundings for 10 minutes. A few minutes later, a recording popped up in my account. When I listened, I recognized my wife's voice speaking with a man. They conversed in English, and I understood every word. Their discussion revolved around ordinary life matters, punctuated by laughter. It became clear they were alone in that room. Suddenly, I heard the clinking of glasses amid their laughter, which made my heart race. Instantly, I sent another command to record for an additional 20 minutes and capture an image of the surroundings. Shockingly, the photo showed a dark square, indicating the phone was placed with the camera facing down. Swiftly, I directed the program to snap a picture using the front camera. The resulting photo showed the phone resting on the bedside table in the room, partially capturing the bed's headboard and an adjacent wall lamp. 15 minutes later, another recording emerged, sending shivers down my spine. As I played it, their laughter and conversation filled my ears once more. I found myself in a state of disbelief and shock, as if my entire world were collapsing right before my eyes. Stunned, I poured myself a drink and instructed the program to record for an additional 4 hours, during which I drowned my sorrows in alcohol. The following morning, Thursday, I was utterly shattered. As it was time for my daughter to go to school, I informed her that she didn't need to attend classes that day. I also notified my boss that I would be taking a couple of personal days until Monday. My wife's expected return was on Sunday, so I settled down and began listening to the 4-hour recording. However, I could only bear to listen for 40 minutes because at that moment I unmistakably heard the sounds of my wife's pleasure, the same sounds I had known for over 13 years. It felt like a sharp knife had pierced my heart, causing both emotional and physical anguish. Overwhelmed, I hurried to the bathroom, feeling nauseous. I couldn't tell if it was a hangover or the current situation causing it. I stood under a freezing shower for 20 minutes, desperately seeking relief. Afterward, I took our daughter to visit her grandparents, promising to explain everything later. Then, I returned home alone. During lunch, my wife called and genuinely inquired about my well-being. I stood there in silence, unable to utter a word, feigning a poor connection. I informed her that I wasn't feeling well and would stay home for a few days, entrusting our daughter to her grandmother's care. That day felt like the most agonizing of my life. I experienced a personal hell, feeling utterly lost and unsure of how to proceed. My mind was consumed by a constant buzzing that drowned out my own thoughts. I sat on the couch and wept like a child, overwhelmed by waves of anger and apathy. The more I let my emotions out, the more they seemed to numb me. By the day's end, I was emotionally drained. In the evening, I returned to the spyware account and began giving commands to the phone. I received photos, some taken from her bag and others from the table. There were recordings of her performances in restaurants with numerous voices, presumably her colleagues. Then, as the evening progressed, I stumbled upon something different. The phone was once again on the bedside table, capturing her voice along with someone else's. However, this time there were no intimate sounds. Unable to endure it any longer, I called her. After 4 rings, she answered, noticeably panting. I inquired about her heavy breathing, and she explained that the hotel elevator had broken down, forcing her to climb the stairs to her room. We talked for a while, and I did my best to maintain a calm and steady voice. Eventually, I mentioned that I was going to bed, wished her good night, hung up, and swiftly sent a command to the spy program requesting a rapid series of pictures using the front camera. Her mistake occurred right then. After our call, she placed the phone not on the bedside table but on the bed beside her. As a result, the front-facing camera started capturing slightly tilted but candid photos. These images revealed her sitting astride someone else, with her head thrown back. Following that, a recording captured unmistakable sounds, instantly exposing her actions. That was the final straw for me. I documented these notes and materials. At that point, she had become a complete stranger to me. From that moment on, I refrained from further investigation until Sunday because everything had become painfully clear. I was pondering my next steps. Should I pursue a divorce? What about our 6-year-old daughter? On Sunday night, she returned home eager to kiss me. I pulled away, telling her I was still unwell. I had an urge to confront her and let my anger out, but instead, I retreated to the office and slept on the sofa. The following morning, I woke up before her. I couldn't bear to be around her any longer and headed to work early. I endured the day mechanically, then approached my boss and urgently requested a week's vacation. I saved all the proof on a flash drive and then phoned my wife. I told her I had to go on a one-day business trip but asked her not to take our daughter away from her grandmother because I had a surprise planned. That night, when I returned home, I packed my bag quickly. She helped me pack, acting politely and innocently. However, her insincerity made me angry. I took my bag, left the USB drive on the bedroom nightstand, and called a taxi to our second apartment, the one set aside for our daughter. Once there, I called a friend and suggested going abroad for a few days. He agreed, and we hastily booked tickets for an early morning flight to Munich. It was in Munich that I confessed everything to him. We explored the city, socialized with other women, and to be honest, I no longer had any feelings for my wife. I ignored her calls and only messaged her to insert the USB drive into my laptop. About 30 minutes later, my phone started ringing non-stop, and I received numerous messages. But I didn't care anymore, so I turned off my phone. We continued our adventures in Munich for 3 more days before I flew back home on Saturday. When I returned, I turned on my phone, and it took me 5 minutes to go through a bunch of messages from my wife. However, I chose not to read them because I was afraid of getting confused before going into the apartment. When I entered, it was oddly quiet inside. I quietly placed my bag down, removed my shoes, and was about to wash my hands when she emerged from the bedroom. Oh my goodness. I had never seen her looking so disheveled and swollen with tears streaming down her face. She dropped to her knees, trying to explain something incoherently amid her sobs and tears. I maintained a stoic expression, urging her not to make a scene. Then, in a composed manner, I asked her about our next steps. She begged me for forgiveness once again, drowning in tears and mucus. She admitted she had made a terrible mistake, claiming she didn't understand how things had come to this point. She even started calling herself names and so on. But I realized that I no longer felt sympathy or anger toward her. She cried out that she loved me and had always loved only me, and that all of this had happened because she had been foolish. She realized during my absence that she had ruined our relationship. But as they say, revenge is best served cold. I told her that we were no longer husband and wife, just mom and dad for our daughter. We would pretend everything was okay between us, but I would live my life, and she could live hers. She was no longer the only one in my life, she was just my partner in raising our child. Maybe someday I'll change my mind, but for now, the thought of being intimate with her makes me sick. By the way, I told her where I had been and what I had been doing. She said she understood everything and was willing to endure whatever it took. No one forced her to speak. As a result, we now share the same apartment, although, to be honest, I've already purchased another one for myself and put it in my father's name to avoid property disputes. I spend most of my time sleeping in the office, although occasionally, I sleep in the bedroom for my daughter's sake. There have been a few times when my wife tried to hug me when we shared a bed, but I rejected her firmly. It's been 3 months since we were intimate. She hasn't confided in her parents, only her father knows about my situation. We agreed to take a family vacation once a year for a week, but now we'd have separate beds. I often hang out with friends and have made new acquaintances, including some attractive women. Sometimes I wonder when she'll reach a breaking point and leave or file for divorce, but she hasn't yet. I frequently catch her staring at me like a scared cat, but honestly, I don't care. Even though I see her making efforts, I find satisfaction in her pain. Recently, I provocatively placed a pack of rubbers on my office desk to taunt her. Despite her reaction, she entered the office to say something, noticed the rubbers on the table, and hurried out, probably in tears. She still goes to work but doesn't stay late anymore, although I don't really keep tabs on her. At some point, she tried to explain to me that she had severed all non-business ties with the other man. It seems she still needs to communicate with him for work-related matters, but she swears she doesn't approach him now. By the way, that guy also has a family. I informed her that her relationships with sexual partners are none of my concern, and she's free to do as she wishes. She doesn't need to update me about her intimate encounters. I also stay out late sometimes now, leaving when our daughter goes to bed, especially on Friday nights. Naturally, I don't hold back when it comes to my desires. If I want sex, it happens. In the morning, I go to the office to sleep or to the bedroom if she's not there anymore. There haven't been any changes in our daily routine at home. I continue to do the grocery shopping and still enjoy cooking. We have a housekeeper for cleaning, so that aspect remains the same. I've been covering the rent for the apartment and still do. I'm not concerned about how or if she spends her money. Our communication is limited to matters about our daughter or her parents when they visit. I suspect that if I were to tell my mother-in-law, she might confront her right in front of me. I have a good relationship with my mother-in-law. She's a smart woman who values family strongly, which is probably one reason why my wife doesn't want to leave. It seems she's afraid of her mom because she knows her mother would ask what's going on, and I won't lie. In general, I tease my wife as much as I can and find enjoyment in it. Yes, maybe I've become somewhat of a monster now, but she's the one who brought this out in me. And you know what surprises me? Her persistence and patience. It's like a challenge to me. I wonder how much more she can endure. Please don't start with the whole, she's the mother of your child, argument. She didn't care much about that when she was involved with that guy for half a year, going on business trips or having affairs in this city without thinking about our daughter or her husband. No comment. Whenever I feel like I might soften, I remember that day and what I felt, which strengthens my resolve. I become unyielding again. So, this is how I'm living now. Our daughter is doing well. We're good parents, and I still help her with her schoolwork in the evenings. Our mutual friends are unaware of our situation. Maybe when I get tired of tormenting her or decide enough is enough, I'll switch off my hostile mode and have a conversation with her, but not right now. Not now. End of OP's post for now. At Common Sense wrote, don't let her off easy haha, give her hopes then, ha ha ha. At Tangledom wrote, bro gotta remember cheating Zex is one of the sweetest Zex out there, like it's so bang it'll give you brain fog so much that you'll travel for it. Like a sudden addiction, haha, it's that sweet bro, don't forgive her #period.
Don't forget to subscribe, like and click on the little bell icon for notifications of new stories.